Here are some of the news headlines we're watching.
By the time the conference was over, the president won a pledge.
So Americans worshiping government over God.
An extremely rare safety move by a nation.
17 years the Palestinians and Israelis negotiated.
Hi, friends. Welcome to In the Market with Janet Parshall. Happy Monday to you, to dads out there. Hope you had a wonderful Father's Day. We're going to start with Israel, something we've been doing almost consistently since October 7th. And this continues to drag on, particularly because one of the concerns from the get-go was that Israel would have to battle for her safety, protection, and her sovereignty on multiple fronts. So it hasn't just been from Gaza. We've had rockets that have come over from Yemen. Now we see there's a lot, of action that's happening in Iran-backed Hezbollah. That, of course, would mean the assaults are coming from the north. And Israeli leaders are very concerned, by the way, that this is now going to be dragging on farther and farther. An IDF spokesperson yesterday said that the intensified missile attacks on northern Israel could have devastating consequences for Lebanon and the entire region. And yet, Israel is noting that there's almost no pressure on Lebanon from the United States or other allies to stop the attacks on Israel, which the world largely ignores. Meanwhile, in Gaza, 12 Israeli soldiers died in several incidents over the weekend, and the IDF has temporarily halted the fighting to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza. So we turn now to CBN. This time, my friend Julie Stahl gives us an update of what's been happening within the last 24 hours. Have a listen.
Israel is warning that Iranian-backed Hezbollah is risking all-out war. This is in response to last week's intense rocket attacks, the worst of the war so far.
Hezbollah's increasing aggression is bringing us to the brink of what could be a wider escalation, one that could have devastating consequences for Lebanon and the entire region.
Since October 7th, Hezbollah has fired more than 5,000 projectiles at Israeli civilians, forcing the evacuation of nearly 100,000 Israelis. Hagari says Iran is behind it all.
Iran's terror proxies continue to drag the region to destruction. Israel will continue fighting against Iran's axis of evil on all fronts, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in other fronts.
Avraham Levine of the Alma Center told CBN News since the beginning, most of the world has been ignoring the Hezbollah attack on northern Israel.
We're talking about a country that's supported with good connections in Europe, with France, good connections with the United States that supports the Lebanese army. Yet there's no pressure on the country to stop, eliminate, or even slow down this attack on the northern front.
The attacks are devastating parts of northern Israel, causing huge fires in the summer heat and dryness.
We're talking about thousands of acres, maybe up to 15,000 acres in the north, all across the western Galilee, northern Galilee, and the northern Golan Heights, all from Hezbollah shooting towards the forests, exploiting the situation for their benefit.
In the south, the IDF suffered severe losses in the fighting in Gaza. 12 Israeli soldiers were killed in separate incidents within 24 hours over the weekend, 8 of them when their armored personnel carrier was hit in an explosion. In an effort to help Gaza's beleaguered citizens, the IDF says it will take a daily pause in fighting in parts of the southern Gaza Strip to help make sure humanitarian aid can get in. The Israel police, whose unit led the rescue of 4 hostages on June 8th, released body cam video of Israeli forces under heavy gunfire while rescuing female hostage Noah Argamani, telling her, "We're taking you home." Sunday, Prime Minister Netanyahu announced the dissolution of the war cabinet formed to manage the war against Hamas and Hezbollah as part of the agreement with Benny Gantz when he joined the coalition government. Netanyahu says Gantz's resignation makes it unnecessary, and he'll make decisions with the defense minister and key cabinet ministers. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
So let me linger a little bit longer on the threats that are coming from Hezbollah. Note the important words here are Iran-backed. And again, as you just heard in Julie's reporting, the concern now is that Iran is trying to draw Israel into a greater confrontation in that part of the world. Here's a report now on the mounting tensions on the Israel-Lebanon border from I-24 in Israel.
With tensions on the Israel-Lebanon border at their highest level in 18 years, the United States is on a diplomatic offensive to try and prevent a full-scale war. Senior U.S. official Amos Hochstein will travel to Israel and to Lebanon on Monday in search of a diplomatic solution. And at least according to a recent interview, Hochstein seems hopeful.
I'm not expecting peace, everlasting peace between Hezbollah and Israel. I don't think that's on the table. But if we can reach a set of understandings and take away some of the impetus for conflict and establish for the first time ever, a recognized border between the two, I think that will go a long way. And I believe it is entirely possible to do that. I truly do.
Hochstein's visit comes as Hezbollah further intensifies its rocket barrages and the IDF striking deeper in Lebanon against the Iranian-backed group. But it's not only Washington that's concerned over the cross-border escalation. The two top UN officials in Lebanon issued a warning, voicing their deep concern over the situation. The danger of miscalculation leading to a sudden and wider conflict is very real, and we continue to engage with the parties and urge all actors to cease their fire and commit to working toward a political and diplomatic solution, which is the only lasting solution. Meanwhile, following last week's elimination of its most senior commander since the start of the war, Hezbollah vowed to amplify their attacks on northern Israel.
The enemy should know that in our definitive and unhesitating answer after the martyrdom of Abu Talib, we will increase attacks in intensity, force, quantity and quality, and let it wait for us in the field.
But behind closed doors, at least according to reports, Hezbollah is playing a different tune. According to a Lebanese report, a senior Hezbollah official says the chance of an all-out war with Israel is still far away at this stage, and that Hezbollah's forceful response to the elimination was not intended to lead to an all-out war. Add to that a report in the London-based Sharq al-Awsat in which Hezbollah advised Hamas to agree to the American ceasefire proposal for Gaza. Both moves signal Hezbollah's reluctance to war, but their actions so far are telling a different story.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get a perspective on what's going on in that part of the world from both an Iranian perspective and an Israeli perspective. This is In the Market with Janet Parshall. We continue to say to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. You can see that what started October 7th shows at this point in time, at least, not ending any time soon. So while we have pressure from the United States, while we have pressure from the ICC, the UN, pressure from all parts of the world, a rise in anti-Semitism, now more than ever before, we need to be praying for that peace of Jerusalem. This is In the Market with Janet Parshall. We'll take a break and continue our focus on the Middle East right after this. Everyday conversations can open the door to evangelism. We just need to know how it's done. That's why I've chosen How to Talk About Jesus Without Looking Like an Idiot as this month's Truth Tool. Learn easy ways to talk about Jesus and discover painless ways to share the gospel. Ask for your copy of How to Talk About Jesus Without Looking Like an Idiot when you give a gift of any amount to In the Market. Call 877-JANET-58, that's 877-JANET-58, or go to inthemarketwithjanetparshall.org. We're going to take some time now to do a deeper analysis of what's going on in that part of the world that we are praying for on a regular basis, and I certainly hope you are. Mahmoud Shariat, often known as Billy Graham of Iran, that name given to him, by the way, by Joel Rosenberg, is going to join us in a few minutes. But we are fortunate that Joel Rosenberg himself is also joining us, now a citizen of Israeli, best-selling author, founder of All Israel News. He is stateside for the time being, and he is visiting Hormuz at his Iran Alive Ministry headquarters in Texas, and we're going to get him on the line in a moment. But, Joel, let me turn to you, the warmest of welcomes. I want to get so many questions I want to ask you. First of all, tell me where you were October 7th, and tell me some of the personal experiences for the Rosenbergs when Israel was attacked.
Oh, thank you, Janet. Great to be with you, and blessings. Thank you for standing with Israel and the Muslim people as God draws us all to himself. But Satan is certainly trying to ruin it. We were in Israel together on October 7th. We had our oldest son and his wife and her twin brother with us. We had just taken them to Egypt. We'd taken them up to the Golan Heights. We'd taken them all over Israel. And they were supposed to fly out on Saturday, October 7th, after a wonderful, wonderful trip. And we had 8 rounds of missiles fired at Jerusalem. We live in Jerusalem. We have an apartment there. And we were in the bomb shelter most of the day. It was worse. You can't say you're used to it, but we've been doing this I've been traveling to Israel for 37 years, and we've been citizens for 10. So we've got a lot of experience with living under rocket fire. But, my son and his wife and brother, they don't. So it was very painful and very and then you realize throughout the day, this is not the normal round. This is not just rockets. The reports started coming in of absolute slaughter. And that started the darkest era in modern Israel. Like Churchill used to use the term the darkest, right? We were in the darkest hour. And that actually became a movie as well. And that's what Israel's going through to this moment. We're getting attacked from every single side physically, right, in terms of missiles and terror attacks, but also in the media and in the international arena, in the world court and the UN. And Biden is schizophrenic. One day he's with us, next day he's trying to cut off our arms supply. So it's a brutal environment right now.
Wow. I thank you so much for the transparency and the honesty. And there's so many things that you brought up that I want to discuss. Let me talk about the concentric impact of the circles of politics. Let me talk, first of all, about Benjamin Netanyahu, as you point out, is being pressured on the global stage from all sides, threatened with being charged with war crimes. The ICC threatening to literally say that Netanyahu could be charged with war crimes. Germany saying if he steps foot in this country, we may possibly arrest him. I mean, unconscionable things we've never, ever seen before. But then he has, politics, as you know, because you know Washington very well, Joel, is a sport where you have to hold your nose. So then you get the war minister resigning, calling for special elections in the middle of a war now. So over the weekend, Netanyahu disbands his war cabinet. Why is that significant? And will that help streamline decisions?
Well, it's too bad in a lot of ways. Benny Gantz is our former defense minister, 36 years in the IDF. He was the IDF chief of staff, and he was the main opposition leader to Netanyahu. Benny Gantz is the most popular political leader in Israel right now. And so when after October 7th, Netanyahu, to Netanyahu's credit, reached out to the head of the opposition, Benny Gantz, and said, hey, this is a unique circumstance. Will you come into a national emergency government and let's fight this war together? And Gantz, to his credit, said yes. But relationship has completely unraveled between them. And Gantz chose to step down. Now, I know I was with Prime Minister Netanyahu in December in his office, long meeting. I know Gantz. I've spent time with him. I like them both, and I respect them both. But I got to tell you, I don't think Gantz has made the right decision right now because the situation in the north, Janet, is getting worse. Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy there, which has 150,000 missiles aimed at us, they're attacking us with more and more ferocity every single day. And so we are about to shift from full operations in Gaza to a full-blown invasion of southern Lebanon. And if that happens, all hell could break loose. In 2006, Hezbollah fired 4,000 missiles at us in a month. Okay, 4,000 in a month. But they have 150,000 missiles now. So if this war goes full-blown, Hezbollah could fire 4,000 missiles a day, Janet, for a month and still have 30,000 missiles left over. And these are much more powerful, much longer range, much more deadly, and they're precision guided. So they can target our refineries, our hospitals, our schools, our churches, our mosques. We are facing an apocalyptic war, and we are burning through ammunition and missile interceptors at a very high rate. And Biden is not delivering, even on the money that Congress just authorized and that he signed, but he won't move the money in a rapid time because he's trying to leverage us into giving up. Yeah. And this is just unconscionable. And it's, the Lord is good and he won't abandon us, but we're feeling pretty abandoned right now, depending on the day, by the United States government.
Yeah, exactly right. So let me talk about what's happening on the northern border, because this is Iran-backed, by the way, and I'm glad that you laid out the numbers so people can understand. From October 7th forward, the concern has always been that Israel would end up, as she always does, fighting for her sovereignty, the only nation, it has been said, that is built with the shovel in one hand and the rifle in the other. The concern was always incursions on multiple fronts. Now, as there's a timeout for aid to be delivered in Gaza, now Hezbollah starts taking this up, and it's increasing. And again, as you say, silence from the United States, and when we need to be moving the aid forward to protect the best friend we have in the Middle East. Time is going to go very quickly in this important conversation. When we come back, our dear friend Hormuz Shariat will join us as well. So again, remember, President Ibrahim Raisi was killed in a helicopter crash. So this country is in flux right now, and yet they seem to be united while leadership is still in question on the fomenting hatred, animosity, weaponry, and attacks against Israel. We'll get Hormuz's perspective on that when we return. This is In the Market with Janet Parshall, Joel Rosenberg, and Hormuz Shariat, our guests. Back after this. Joel Rosenberg, who is a best-selling author and founder of All Israel News, is stateside, leaving his home of Israel for a bit, but how wonderful for us to get a perspective, a first eyewitness report as to exactly what happened on October 7th and what's happening there currently. But Dr. Hormuz Shariat is hosting Joel right now, a guest frequently on this program, founder of Iran Alive Ministries. And Hormuz, I want to get your perspective on this because, again, Iran is all over the news as Iran-backed Hezbollah, talking about the uptick in the incursions on the northern border. But meanwhile, there's unrest in Iran because Raisi dies. The Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei appoints the first vice president, says, you'll run the affairs of the country. He then is supposed to organize the election for the new president. He's going to work, apparently, with the heads of the parliament and the judiciary. And that was supposed to be held 50 days from May 20th. Look at your clock. We've run almost 30 of those 50 days so far. What are your sources in Iran telling you about the political unrest in Iran right now?
Well, Iranian government is in transition. They know that the supreme leader is not going to live long, so they are trying their best to make this transition without incident. They're so afraid, the people in power in Iran. They're so afraid that during that transition, they will lose power, the people will uprise, and the government will come down. So they are making plans to go through this as smooth as possible without people uprising and without any incident. So this election is just one step there. Bring somebody who is a puppet, who will not cause trouble. The president has no power in Iran anyway. You know that. The power is in the hands of the supreme leader. So they're trying to find somebody, one of the people. It's not really an election. You know that. I mean, Iran is not a free country for people to vote. Most of them don't even vote. But it's just this election of selection, appointment of somebody who will not cause them trouble. That's what's happening in Iran. At the same time, referring to what Joel said, there is a movement in Iran, a pro-Israel movement in Iran. Did you know after October 7th, there were rallies by Iranians around the world pro-Israel? Did you know even on American universities, there were Iranians protesting and supporting Israel, and many of them were beat up by Palestinians, a pro-Palestinian crowd on U.S. universities. So when you say Iran, you have to realize the Iranian government has a totally different than Iranian people. The Iranian government wants to destroy Israel, wipe Israel off the map, but the people of Iran, the people are admiring Israel. They say, we want to be like Israel one day. We want to be free. And so you see a pro-Israel rallies, both even inside Iran and outside Iran. This is happening politically and spiritually in Iran.
Yeah. Wow, amazing. So, Joel, what I'm hearing both from Hormuz and from you is that Aslan's on the move. I don't know how else to put it. Things are absolutely moving at breakneck speed. You've got this pro-Israel faction inside Iran. You've got Hezbollah being backed by Iran. And you just gave us the missile count of what potentially could happen on the northern border of Israel. You know, it'd be very easy for us to subscribe to the majority spy report as opposed to listening to what Caleb and Jacob had to say, or Caleb and Joshua had to say. What does the believer in the West do here, particularly when so much of the news they get is saturated with anti-Semitism. Add to that a heavy layer of biblical illiteracy, and we're lost in the dark. We don't know the role we play here.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great analysis, Janet. Because why are Hormoz Sharia and Joel Rosenberg spending the day together?
Exactly.
You know? I mean, you got an Iranian Shia Muslim who in 1979 was shouting "Death to America, Death to Israel" on the streets of Tehran. And I'm from an Orthodox Jewish family, and I'm now an Israeli. We're spending time together because Jesus Christ has completely upended our lives. He's totally saved us and our families, and he's brought our hearts together to say the world is trying to figure out how to fix these problems, but they're using worldly wisdom. There's only one way to fix these problems, and it's that every Iranian and every Israeli, every Jew gets transformed by Jesus, the King of the world. And so we're spending time together today, praying together, discussing, because we know prophetically where we're headed. We're headed toward Jeremiah 49, where God destroys and judges the leaders of Iran. It's explicitly laid out in Jeremiah 49. And then he's going to transform Iran into a Christian nation. Jeremiah 49:38, God says, I'm going to move my throne there. Now, we know that ultimately God's going to move his throne back to Jerusalem when Jesus reigns for 1,000 years. But before that, he's going to move his spiritual throne into Iran and make Iran the greatest Christian missionary sending country in the history of mankind, with millions of Apostle Pauls, former religious fanatics who get transformed by the power of the Holy Spirit and then start traveling all over the world to preach the gospel. That was Paul. That's Hormoz, and that's what's coming in Iran. Meanwhile, we're right now, we're heading towards a Romans 11:26 world where all Israel will get saved, but we're a ways off from that. Right now, we're in an Amos 9:9 world, Janet, where God says, "I will shake the whole house of Israel," and Satan was responsible for October 7th and every day since to come and rob, kill, and destroy. But God is sovereignly letting it happen to humble us as Jews, as Israelis, and even with America beginning to waffle, that is telling us we have to turn to God and his Son and his Word, or we don't have hope.
Friends, if you don't hear anything anywhere today, what you just heard is the most important thing for you to consider. This is why we say frequently on this program, you go through life with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. If your heart isn't beating a little faster watching all of the events unfold in the Middle East, awake, O sleeper, I'll borrow from Brother Paul. Things are happening in that part of the world. You need to be praying for revival, for wisdom for those in authority, for a peace that passes understanding, and pray specifically for Joel Rosenberg and Hormoz Sharia. Blessings to you, brothers. Let me give a big shout out to our Parshall partners. Thank you, friends. Parshall partners are becoming the backbone of this ministry. Their generous monthly gifts allow us to provide relevant, compelling programming every day. When you become a Parshall partner, you'll receive private emails directly from me, a weekly audio message only you will hear, and special behind-the-scenes updates as well. Become a Parshall partner today by calling 877-JANET-58 or go to inthemarketwithjanetparshall.org. We're going to go from talking about the storms in the Middle East to the storms in the sky. Joining me now is Steve Gorman, Executive Director of the Climate Science Coalition of America. He's the author of 4 books on energy, climate change, and sustainable development, with over 100,000 copies in print. His latest book, and it's right there on my information page, is Green Breakdown, the Coming Renewable Energy Failure. Steve, the warmest of welcomes. I'm thrilled you're here, and I'm actually excited to talk to you about this because, particularly for those of us here in the Mid-Atlantic, we pay very close attention to the forecasting, and I put that word in quotes, of organizations like NOAA when they predict what the next hurricane season is going to look like. So if you look at the hurricane season, it goes from June 1 to November 30th. And here's what NOAA is predicting for 2024. 85% chance of an above normal season, a 10% chance of near normal season, and a 5% chance of below normal season. Now, Steve, I got to tell you, my first thought is it sounds like you're laying odds at the Preakness rather than it's a scientific organization trying to tell us what's going on. I'm because I've been here not years but decades, I've gone used to this. It's going to be a boo, bad, horrible, terrible hurricane season, and everybody always wonders what's going to happen in terms of property damage. Most of the time they're wrong. So what are the facts here? Not somebody's opinion, not again rolling the dice, but what do we know about storms? Because so much of this is attributed allegedly to climate change. So are we seeing an uptick in disasters, storm disasters?
Hi, Janet. Great to join you again. Yeah, NOAA has forecasted 17 to 25 storms in the Atlantic this year. That's a combination of tropical storms that get up to 39 miles an hour wind speed, and then hurricanes that are 74 miles an hour or higher. Last year, but most of these don't make landfall. You know, these are often they've been for about the last 2 decades. They've been counting these storms that are out in the Atlantic that never come in contact with any land. Maybe Bermuda occasionally. Last year we had one hurricane make landfall in the United States, which is a little bit low. The average has been running about 1.5 hurricanes per year, which is down, by the way. Your listeners can go to a website at NOAA and look up hurricanes, and NOAA lists all of the hurricanes that have made landfall in the United States since about 1850, and there have been about 300 of those. And typically we were getting about 2 hurricanes per year on average, and now we're getting about 1.5 hurricanes a year. The number of landfalls has actually been declining, contrary to what you hear in the press and endless news and weather about stronger hurricanes and storms. The data does not show it.
And yet it gets promoted all the time that this is directly attributable to climate change, a, quote, existential threat. And yet I'm looking at the graph that you referenced going from 1850 to the 2010s. And except for the 1970s, which was the lowest point, it has been a downward trend continuously. It's tough to make your case if this is evidence, Your Honor, that somehow directly attributable again to climate change is the increase in problematic storms. And you made another excellent point. You're right. If it's out in the mid-Atlantic and it's turning and twisting, but it doesn't make landfall, that gets counted anyway, even though it doesn't hit the land. So what do we do when we hear people say that this is attributable? So my position would be Abe Lincoln, 20% of the time preparing our case, 80% of the time preparing their argument. On what basis do they make the prediction that climate change is inexorably connected to an uptick in storms? A, there's not an uptick in storms. But even if I took their argument for a minute, why are they saying that climate change is tied to that?
Well, it's part of the ideology of climatism, the fear of man-made global warming, and it's been trumpeted for the last couple decades by the United Nations and others. The World Meteorological Organization just published a paper saying, as I quote, "The number of weather, climate, and water extremes are increasing and will become more frequent and severe in many parts of the world as a result of climate change." But again, you don't see that. You can look at global data from satellites as well. A guy by the name of Ryan Maui has been tracking this for many years. And NASA has been using satellites to track tropical storms and hurricanes for about 50 years now, and produces graphs. And while the number of storms and of tropical storms and stronger hurricanes go up and down every year, it's been very, very flat for 50 years. We get typically in any 12-month period about 90 tropical storms on the surface of the Earth and about 45 hurricanes. And the storms aren't getting stronger either. If tropical storms are getting stronger over time, more of them would become hurricanes, and the number of hurricanes, the hurricane counts would be rising, but they are not rising. So again, the data does not support the fear. And it's just another example of what you read in the press about climate is if you read an article, it's most likely incorrect in several ways.
And a whole lot of fear-mongering. That's why I love talking to you, Steve, because John Adams said it. Facts are stubborn things. So again, I'm looking at another graph that considers the average annual number of deaths from disaster. Now, maybe we're better prepared than we've ever been before, but you can't discount the fact that from 1960 onward, it is once again a marked downward trend. So I fail to see the fear-mongering and how that's playing out with the objective facts and figures that are out there. It just, one doesn't match the other.
Yeah, that's from MDAT, the International Disaster Database. And actually, if you go back to 1920, we were having about 500,000 deaths a decade from disasters, and now it's running about 50,000 deaths per decade. So it's down by about 90%. And a lot of that is because we have better warning systems and we better shelters for people and all of that sort of thing. But it's certainly not an indication that storms are causing more deaths and more disasters. Maybe the only thing that's rising is the cost of some of these, because we have real estate and homes cost more, and all these settlements along the ocean front, which weren't there in the past. And so when we do have a hurricane, we end up having more damage. But even the inflation-adjusted numbers of damage have been declining as well. So again, the evidence is not there, despite what you hear in the press. So when you hear that article, be a little bit skeptical.
Yeah, exactly right. You point out that the state of Vermont recently passed a law that would require oil companies, big bad boo, terrible fossil fuels again, oil companies to pay for climate damage from weather events, like if the floods struck, like what happened in Vermont last year when they were hit with floods. Now, talk to me about this legislation, because again, the target is fossil fuels. Why does an oil company have to pay for damage caused by a storm?
Yeah, again, it's another thing that's really not based on fact. Last year, Vermont had a big flood, one of the biggest in their history, but they also had a bigger one back in 1927, long before we had any significant human emissions in the atmosphere. They had dozens of people die in 1927 from the floods. But they are the first state to enact a law requiring fossil fuel companies, so-called fossil fuel companies, to pay a share of the damage caused by climate change. And I'm really not sure how they're going to do this. It says that the treasurer of the state is going to make some kind of estimation of how much oil companies owe on this. But this is going to be overturned. It's going to go into the courts. And we have had the city of New York, city of Chicago, cities and counties in Colorado, Oakland, California, San Francisco, all sue oil companies looking for damages over the last 10, 15 years. There has not been a single case when monetary damages have been awarded against the oil companies. Now, there have been some suits that have been successful where they have gone to the courts and said that the state is the defendant. The state needs to do more on climate, and in some cases, judges have ruled for that. But judges have not said that individual states and counties can go after oil companies and be successful. They say that this is really something for legislation at the federal level or in other areas.
I agree.
So just a crazy law that's really not. It's going to be overturned, I predict, in the next few years.
I think you're spot on, and I thank you for pointing out this law that just got passed in Vermont. But it does raise a question, because this is palpable bias. So when a Cat 3 hurricane hits, for example, and it knocks down the wind turbines and it pulls the solar panels off of a roof, nobody has to pay? It's just the oil company that should be punished? I mean, on its face, it falls under its own weight, doesn't it?
Well, the ratepayers are going to pay, and the oil companies are going to raise prices. By the way, the state of New York was also, I think they are currently suing beef producers. They've been doing that for a little bit of a while, because cattle emit methane, and they say they contribute to climate change. But all that will do is increase food prices for people. It's not going to have any effect on global temperatures.
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, but wipe out people who make their living as farmers, right? Particularly if they're raising beef cattle. So the thing that amazes me, just as a quick philosophical point before we go to a break, is, again, what I'm hearing is this unbridled, enthusiastic, tree-hugging, embracing of the environment, and very little thought to the fellow man. So for example, and you brought up the methane issue, what are you going to do to a person who's been cattle ranching for 100 years as a family. You don't care about what happens to them because you're more concerned about the climate. Any climate change policy that puts an extra burden on my fellow man is, as far as I'm concerned, from my worldview, dead on arrival. We've got more to talk about. I'm so glad that Steve Gorham is with us. He's a prolific author on this particular topic. His latest book is right there on my information page for you to read. It's called Green Breakdown, The Coming Renewable Energy Failure. Steve, of course, is the executive director of the Climate Science Coalition of America. He's written 4 books. That latest is number 4. Check it out. We'll be right back. More with Steve after this. We're visiting with Steve Gorman, Executive Director of the Climate Science Coalition of America, author of 4 books on energy, climate change, and sustainable development. His latest book is called Green Breakdown, The Coming Renewable Energy Failure. We brought up methane just before the break, Steve. I want to linger here just a little bit longer if I can. I go a little bit crazy every time I hear Bill Gates talk about this. You know, I'll give the man credit where credit is due. He's brilliant when it comes to computers, but he doesn't know anything about cows. And so every time he opens his mouth to tell me what I should be eating, and beef is not one of them, according to Bill Gates's worldview, it drives me a little bonkers. And he reminds me that there is something in a post-truth culture known as the cult of the elites. And just because he's made $1 gazillion with computers doesn't mean he's the grand wizard when it comes to climate science. But so again, putting aside the religiosity of this movement, and there certainly is that there, talk to me about climate change, because you've pointed out that the UN said just this year that methane is 80 times more potent at warming than carbon dioxide. Well, it's a fascinating question because I don't think carbon dioxide is a pollutant. I don't think it's a problem. So now you've got a non-problem being threatened 80 more times by methane. Break that down for me. Does methane hurt the climate?
Yeah, well, they're both greenhouse gases, which means that outgoing infrared radiation from the surface of the Earth is absorbed in the atmosphere both by carbon dioxide and by methane. And that does tend to warm the surface of the Earth a little bit. Now, again, your audience should know that overwhelmingly the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is from nature. About 20 times as much every day of the carbon dioxide that goes in the atmosphere is from nature, not from our industries. But lately they've been attacking methane, and the EPA just finalized emissions rules for the oil and gas sector. And what you hear in the press is that methane is 80 times more potent at warming, and what they mean by this is that it absorbs more infrared radiation. The problem with this is that it's true in the laboratory, but not in the atmosphere. Because in the atmosphere, methane is already saturated. And so your listeners, I ought to ask them if any of them paint a room in their house 10 times. And, of course, no one will say they will, because after 2 coats of paint, you really can't see any difference.
Right.
Well, that's the situation we have in the atmosphere right now. Methane is saturated in the atmosphere at the frequencies at which it absorbs infrared radiation and the greenhouse effect. So if either nature or human industry, and by the way, we have termites and all sorts of things, all sorts of animals emit methane, natural gas, from the nose end and the tail end, and goes into nature. If we were to double the amount of methane in the atmosphere, which is a huge thing, probably never would occur, the amount of temperature rise would be about 2 or 3 tenths of a degree Celsius. It'd be very, very small, undetectable in the Earth's temperature. So, again, just another misguided thing, the idea that methane is a big greenhouse gas absorber, true in the lab, not in the atmosphere. And all these foolish laws that the Biden administration is trying to put into place are just going to raise expenses for energy. And if they start applying it to the agriculture field, it'll be the same thing there. It'll raise the cost of food and hurt citizens.
Yeah, without a doubt. So we're talking about weather. Talk to me about droughts on this. Are we going to see an extended period of drought? Have droughts gotten worse? Again, these are all claims made by the people who believe in scientism and think that this is going to be an existential threat. Do the facts reflect that?
Yeah, droughts and floods, just like Vermont. But again, we have very good data on droughts and floods and the portion of the United States that's either very wet or very dry. And that comes again from NOAA. They use a metric called the Palmer Drought Index. And if you go back the last century, you can see that we've had many, many times of drought, many, many times of flood. There is no indication that we're getting more drought or more flood, despite the headlines about Florida, South Florida, or about Houston, Texas. We've had those events in the past. And so, again, it's every time there's a drought or a flood, people say your neighbor's SUV is doing it. That's really not accurate. We've not seen an increase in drought or flood.
That's good to know. Thank you for that. Talk to me about China, because apparently green energy policies end up in the final analysis favoring the CCP. Why is that?
They do. Well, the current administration, again, wants to take and reduce oil and natural gas and coal. We are the biggest producer of oil in the world, the biggest producer of natural gas. That is a tremendous strength. Our natural gas prices, for example, are about 1/4 of what they are in Europe and much of the rest of the world. But the Biden administration wants to get rid of all that. They want us to put up wind turbines, which use rare earths. They want us to drive electric vehicles, which use 6 times the metals of a gasoline car, copper and lithium and cobalt and other metals, nickel. Those things are refined in China by and large. So although he's recently raised tariffs on electric vehicles and on batteries and on solar cells, again, 80% of solar cells in the world are produced in China. But he wants everybody to switch to those, which would put us in grow a dependence on China for all of these and move away from our strength, which is coal, oil, and natural gas.
Wow. This has gone far too quick, Steve. Let me just go back to the primary thesis of your latest book, Green Breakdown, The Coming Renewable Energy Failure. You see this as definitely being a breakdown, and you believe that people in the end are going to return to low-cost, reliable energy. If I can add a caveat to that, if the government allows them. I mean, we had the governor of Virginia recently say that Gavin Newsom is not going to set the stage for us in Virginia about whether or not we have to have electric vehicles. Exactly. So why do you think there's going to be a green breakdown?
Well, because we're going to have higher energy prices. We're going to have electricity blackouts. We're going to see more and more of those as we move to intermittent renewables. People are going to push back against governments that tell them you can't have a gasoline car. And I think they're going to demand a return to low-cost, reliable energy when all these things stack up. And we're already seeing that in some areas. EVs actually lost share last quarter in the United States. So we're going to see this break down. And the good news is that we will get back to sensible energy policy again.
Yeah. Steve, I can't tell you how much I appreciate our conversations. I learned so much from you, and I want our friends to know that your books are tremendously filled with information. But what I like particularly is that you don't have to be a climatologist to read them. They're user-friendly. And he uses a lot of information, a lot of graphs, just to really help us grasp exactly what's going on. So the latest book, and I would recommend any of the 4 that he's written, but the latest is called Green Breakdown, The Coming Renewable Energy Failure. If you go to inthemarketwithjanetparshall.org, under the description of the 2 hours that we do, there's a link. It says Program Details and Audio. Click that on. It'll take you over to the information page. There's a longer bio for Steve. There's a link to the work that he does. And on the right-hand side, there's the book Green Breakdown, The Coming Renewable Energy Failure. And I always hear from listeners after you're here, Steve, because they really appreciate what you have to say and how you say it. Thank you so much. And thank you, friends, for joining us. We'll see you next time on In the Market with Janet Parshall.